morning to you. Can you hear me at the back? Yes? Excellent. As you have just learned, my name is Mark Smith, and I genuinely have the privilege to be the curator of the Royal Artillery Museum, which is the museum just over there. Hopefully you'll be visiting later on. The building that you're actually in is part of what we call the Greenwich Heritage Centre, which is a museum that we work very closely with. We like to call this part of London the Greenwich Heritage Quarter. And it is truly a joint way of doing a museum, in that our museum tells the story of artillery, it tells the story of guns, it tells the story of those who used the guns. But the Greenwich Heritage Centre tells the story of the manufacturers, it tells the story of the factory, it tells the story of the workforce and the people who lived in and around the area of Woolwich. And between the two of us, we can give a complete picture of how the Royal Arsenal has worked since 1716 and how the Royal Regiment has used this place as a training facility, research and development, and also the area that it recruited a lot of its people from. So I'm quite indebted today to the Greenwich Heritage Centre and their manager Chris Ford for allowing us to use their conference facility. So I'd just like to say that. The actual building that you're in is a factory. It's part of the Royal Arsenal. The factory was built just before the Boer War, and originally it was a cartridge factory, and it made cartridge cases for the 15-pounder field guns for the Boer War. All of our buildings are quite historic, and the building that you will go over to eventually to see the museum was built in 1850, and it was a cartridge factory for rifles, but for the Crimean War in its earliest guise. As I said, I'm quite privileged to have this job. I am a Ministry of Defence civil servant, and actually this is a posting. However, this is a pretty good posting. Someone just said, lucky you, down the front. But yes, I agree with that one. My wife, every morning when I go off, she actually doesn't say, are you off to work? She says, you off to play? And I say yes. And it is a hobby that I get paid for, I'm sorry to say. For me, this hobby started when I was 6. Friday afternoons, I used to go home from school and I would go to my nan's. And every Friday afternoon, I would go to my nan's and I would go in and I'd say, Nan, can I? And yes, you can. And the can I was to open the sideboard and to pull out a little wooden box, which when you opened it, had my dad's medals in it from World War II. My dad was an air gunner in the Royal Air Force, and his 5 medals and his sergeant stripes and his warrant officer's badge and his air gunner's brevet used to live in this little cardboard box, and I was forever fascinated by these things. And I used to, at the end of the day, put them all very carefully back in the box, put them back in their little cardboard box, put it back in the sideboard. And one particular Friday afternoon, my nan said to me, why don't you just have them? Really? Yes, just have them. So I took this little box home, and apocryphally the story says that as I walked past the living room door, my dad said, he's got my medals. Where's he going? I went into my bedroom and I cleared a little space on my bookcase, and I laid out all my dad's medals and his stripes and his air gunner's brevet. And at Thursday afternoons, we used to go to the library from school, and we wandered off to the library, and I went in and I said to the lady, do you have any books on medals? And she said, yes, but they're in the adult section. And I said, does that mean I can't have one? And she said, no, but you're going to have to come with me to get it. So I wandered off with this lady, and she gave me a book on medals, which I'm going to be honest with you, I probably didn't read, I just looked at the pictures. But from that second onwards, I was hooked. Utterly. At home, I have 5,730 medals. I have 1 Victoria Cross, which belongs to me. One of the things that I have tried to do, when I got married, I worked out that I had a very small house all of a sudden, and not much room, and not much money. And this was quite a while ago, and medals could be cheap if you bought First World War medals. And I'll come back to why the First World War fascinates me in a second, but First World War medals were cheap. And I decided that what I would do is I would collect a set of medals to a man who was killed, but I wanted one for a man who was killed on every single day of World War I. The first man killed, 21st of August, the last 11th of November. 1,555 days of combat. I have 670 men's medals. I'm about a third of the way there. I'll do it before I die, but it's getting so much more difficult. The reason that I am lost in the First World War is because when I was small and I was collecting these medals, as I say, I started when I was about 6. When other children presumably went to bed and their dad came along and told them a story, it was probably about Flopsy the bunny rabbit or something, I don't know. Mine weren't. Mine were stories of how many rads deflection you needed on a quarter crossover to shoot down the Junkers 88 as it attacked you from the rear in the dark over Berlin. My dad, obviously, as you say, was an air gunner, so this is what I learned. And I was always steeped in military things, military history. I was the first person born into my family for 41 years, so I was a real novelty when I turned up. Oh, trust me. But what this did is it put me into a world of people who were old, who had history. I said to my nan one day, the same one who had the box in the sideboard, I said to my nan one day, have you ever seen the Queen? And she said, oh yes, I've seen Queen Victoria. Ah, okay. And a little bit later on, I was thinking about those films of the soldiers marching off to the First World War. And I said, did you see the soldiers march off to the First World War, Nan? So she said, yes. Now that's a really silly question because her husband was in the First World War. I'll come back to him in a second. She said, yes, but I saw them march off to the Boer War as well. Ah, okay. I had 2 aunts. They were tiny little people. Auntie Doe and Auntie Hilda. They were sisters. And I got into this sort of collecting thing. And one day they said to me, why don't you have this? And it was a paybook. And it was the paybook of my great-great-great-granddad, Henry Dickerson. He joined the army in 1854. He did 21 years. And there was his paybook. And I said to them, have you got a photograph of him? He was born in 1830. I've got a photograph of him. And they looked at each other and they said, have you ever seen a photograph of him? No. Don't think I've ever seen a photo. No, there's no photo. So I said, I wonder what he looked like. They went, what, he looked like you? Same colour hair. I said, you knew him? I said, well, of course we knew him. He was Uncle Henry. I suddenly had this link with 1830 within my family. And in this world that I grew up in, the stories of historical things, my nan was the nanny for Scott of the Antarctic. She looked after Peter Scott. Auntie Dull was the cook for the Scott family. My nan told me one day that she went into Lady Scott's bedroom when they were away and she tried on every dress that Lady Scott owned. And when she'd finished and she put them all back in the wardrobe, on top of the wardrobe was a hat box. And she thought, I'll try those hats on. And she said, I took down the hat box and I opened it and it was full of shrunken heads from the South Seas. And she said, that's the last time I ever looked through any of these people's cupboards. The world in which I lived in was peopled by these wonderful people who could tell me such fantastic stories. My dad's dad was called Walter Schmidt. My family came from Germany in about 1840. My first relative that I can find from there is called Jakob Schmidt. Walter Schmidt was in a queue in St Paul's churchyard on the 8th of September 1914. And when he got to the front of the queue, the man said to him, name? And he said, Walter Smith. And we became Smiths. Because I think he had this thought of someone shouting out, "Oi, Walter Schmidt," in our trenches, and it really wouldn't have gone down well. So Smiths we were from then on. My granddad had already been given 3 feathers, white feathers, by his sisters, because he hadn't already joined by the 8th of September. He was in the King's Royal Rifle Corps. He went out to France. He landed in France on the 15th of July, 1915. I know, I found his medal index card, bless him. He got a trio. It's one of my proudest sets of medals that I have at home. He was wounded at Loos. He was a machine gunner. He was a Lewis gunner. He was wounded at Loos. He was then gassed. And then he went over the top on the Somme, as many men did, but he went over in August 1916 at Highwood. And the story goes that all he saw was the purple flash. Never heard a sound, and he woke up about 11 hours later in no man's land, fairly badly wounded. His friend had disappeared completely, and he was then discharged from the army. He had quite a lot of holes in him, so I'm told, and he died in 1959 from the effects of being gassed when he was 63 years old. He was only allowed to talk about the war on Christmas Day. That's his only moment. Now, I actually find that quite spooky because my birthday's Christmas Day. So I would have loved to have listened to my granddad talk about the First World War on Christmas Day. My other granddad was born in 1899, and he was one of the men of 18 in 1918, and he went out just after the Kaiserschlacht battle in March and served throughout the whole of the rest of the First World War, enjoyed the army, joined up, he was in the Rifle Brigade, joined up as a regular, transferred to the Essex Regiment, and stayed on to about 1924. He was a boxer, 5'2" boxer. He was nice, my granddad. By the time I'd worked out what question to ask, he'd forgotten the answers though. That was a problem. But every now and then, little granddad would sit there and say, do you know, when I was in the trenches, a story. And he'd say something really ridiculous then, like, you know, I'd lost my spoon or something. It's never the good bit, you know, it was never the anyway. But I had this link with these wonderful people. My granddad, when my mum and dad got married in 1943, my granddad, apparently, I wasn't there, my granddad stood up and he said, only his speech, I can actually give you my entire grandfather's speech at my mum and dad's wedding. He said, always aim at 6 o'clock at the ball, son, and fear nothing, and sat down. Which is a bizarre speech, but it was the speech that he gave to my dad. We weren't necessarily a militaristic family, but we were a very patriotic family. When war was declared, my grandfather, Walter Smith, was the master butcher of Smithfield Meat Market. And he put an 18-pound meat cleaver on a hook on the back door for the first German that parachuted into his garden in Walthamstow. Okay? And when I was small, the hook was still there on the back door. We were very patriotic. My dad had a bigger brother. His name was Victor Clarence. So that whenever Victor Clarence joined the army, he would always be Smith, VC. I think it's quite a nice idea. Victor Clarence never went. He had asthma. He never went. But Leslie did, my dad, and he went off and he joined the Royal Air Force because he never ever wanted to be in a trench like the ones that his dad had told him about. We lived in Walthamstow, and apparently when they went to the selection thing, they said to people, what do you want to be? And my dad said, I want to be a bomb aimer. And they said, do you know, you're the first one who said that. Everybody else wants to be a pilot. Why do you want to be a bomb aimer? He said, I live in the East End. I'm going to get my own back on this. And bless him, he did. He did 106 operations. So he did it. He did do it. And I learned how to be an air gunner when I was about 6. Something obviously had inspired grandfather to call Victor Clarence. This Victoria Cross thing permeates through all of us, through all strands of our society. As we know, the Victoria Crosses are made from metal from guns captured in the Crimea. Sorry, they're not. They never were. They never were meant to be. And they never have been. So sorry about that, but they're not. In 1856, a public opinion was taken to Queen Victoria, and it said that there must be a medal which celebrates and marks the bravery of our soldiers fighting in the Crimea. Now you have to go back to the Crimean War. In 1853, soldiery, general soldiery, was looked upon as the scum of the earth. This is what you did if you didn't want to go to prison. You joined the army. The soldiers went out to the Crimea, and they become the first soldiers that have instant news reporting about them. Roger Fenton goes out with his camera. The man from the Times newspaper, whose name has completely escaped me at this moment in time, but he went as well. That's the man, Russell. And what we're talking about now, in their day, is a 2-week turnaround of news. So when those guys charged at Balaclava, within 2 weeks, that was in the newspaper. And these stories were thrilling. Public opinion said, suddenly, these guys are doing and dying for England. These are Englishmen, and they are being incredibly brave. What we need is some medal. We need a medal. The Indian Army had a medal. They'd have a medal since 1824, the Indian Army Order of Merit. We needed a medal as well, which we could use to reward bravery. And Queen Victoria took that on board, and she came up personally herself with the idea of a cross, which she would call the Victoria Cross. They came up with 3, I think, in the end, designs for the cross, and she chose the one that we know today, but she didn't like the wording on that, and she changed the wording, and she changed it to something simple, just simply for valour. What she said is that the cross must not be ostentatious. It's not the cross which is the important thing, it is the deed behind the cross. When they went out with the royal warrant to find the person who was going to make the cross, they went to every jeweller in London. And they walked into every jeweller's in London and they said, Queen Victoria would like a medal made. And they said, well, certainly. Gold, platinum. How many diamonds? And they said, no. We want it made of bronze. And to a man, every jeweller said, no, not interested, sorry. And they walked into a jeweller's which had been open for 4 years. It was a jeweller's called Hancock's. They wandered in and they said, don't suppose you're interested in Queen medal. And Hancock went, yes. Shrewd business move, yes? I think so. Possibly made him the most famous jeweller in the world next to Fabergé. He said yes, and he took on the remit to make the first Victoria Crosses. The Times newspaper published the story that the medals would be made from a captured gun taken at Sebastopol. Now, I've actually been to Hancock's, and Hancock's have the most meticulous records. And there is nothing in those records that says large lump of medal received from the War Office from a gun captured at Sebastopol. And when you say to them, where did the first block of metal come from? They say, we don't know. It was probably just in stock. They made the first batch of 60 medals that were given out by Queen Victoria on the 25th of June 1857 in Hyde Park from something that they already had in stock. Those very first medals are completely different in metallurgical content to the ones that come later. Each medal had a ribbon. Originally, if you were in the army, it was a red ribbon, and if you were in the Royal Navy, it was a blue ribbon. On the back of the suspender is engraved your name and your regiment. And on the back of the cross, in a circle, is engraved the date on which you won your award. They cost, in their day, 8 shillings to make, engrave, ribbon and box. I always tell my soldiers today, I do every phase 2 recruit comes through the museum for their ethos training, and I say to them, I don't want to disappoint you, but when you do win your Victoria Cross, it comes in a cardboard box. And they do. They come in a cardboard box. Because Queen Victoria had said, it's not the medal, it's the deed. The guns do come into a story. No one really knows what those first Victoria Crosses were made of, and nobody really knows what those first Victoria Crosses were made of until about 1914. But there is a wonderful set of letters that go out that say, the metal's run out. And the War Office say, okay, this idea about the guns, is that true? And they say, no. So they say, right, well, what we're going to do is we're going to choose 2 guns and we're going to cut bits off the gun and we'll use that metal. And an order comes down here to the Royal Arsenal for 2 guns to be chosen, captured guns, and those 2 guns to be used to produce the Victoria Cross. 2 guns were chosen. People say to me, why did they choose those 2 guns? True story? God knows. Apocryphal story? It was the closest 2 guns to the man's shed and it was raining. I think that's about how technical we are on this one, because he chose 2 completely separate guns. He got 2 Chinese guns, okay, not Russian, 2 Chinese guns, and he went out and he cut the back off of 2 guns. Must have taken him hours. The blocks that he cut off, about 64 kilograms each. Huge blocks of metal. And these went back to Hancock's and they cut them, and the 2 guns, I can safely say, have now made over 800 Victoria Crosses between them. And what I want you to do after the speech and at lunchtime is to go over to the main museum and see them, because they're standing in the foyer. When you go in, you'll stand in front of them. The one on the left-hand side, all of the metal from that one has finished. The last Victoria Cross that my left-hand gun made as you stand and look at them was Guy Gibson's for the Dam Busters raid. The gun on the right-hand side, the block still remains, and that's the one they're using today. That's made Corporal Bahari, Lance Corporal Bahari, Corporal Budd, Corporal Appiator and Corporal Donaldson's. It's their Victoria Crosses that are being made from that gun. 150th anniversary of the Victoria Cross, I managed to get the 2 guns, obviously, here in the museum, and I tried to get as many of the 62 Victoria Crosses that the Royal Regiment has won over the last 55 years. In the collection we have 23, and on that particular day I managed to put that up to 37 of them. I also managed to get the remaining block from Donington. The last time that was united with the gun was 1914, when the man cut it off. And I was very honoured to be able to pick up this block. We went in a Peugeot 206, P-Reg. We arrived at Donington, and the man came out and he said, "You Smith?" I said, "Yes." Cardboard box. As he gave me the cardboard box, 6 policemen on motorbikes and a car appeared behind us, and they followed us, blue lights flashing, all the way from Donington back to the museum. Never felt so silly in all my life. I arrived here on Friday lunchtime. I walked into my office and they said, "You will be putting this in the safe." Okay. Yes. And I put it in my bottom drawer because I haven't got a safe. And we did the exhibition. I walked up to the gun that everybody said, this is the gun that the Victoria Cross block comes from, and I put it on the back. It didn't fit. And I thought, oh God, I've got Lord Ashcroft coming. It's not going to be good, this. And I walked over to the other gun and it fitted straight on. Fantastic. You could actually almost see where it had come from. We had the exhibition, and on the Monday, 6 motorbikes, police car, Peugeot 206, me in a cardboard box. They drove us back to Donington, handed it in. I picked up my box Friday lunchtime. It had a 16-kilogram block of metal in it. I took it back on Monday lunchtime. I had to insure it for the time in between for £85 million. We worked out my 2 guns weigh 5 tonnes. It's about just over £100 million worth of gun, each one. So do go and have a look at them, because they are quite special. Lord Ashcroft came and opened the collection. And you are aware of Lord Ashcroft in his medal collecting role. Let's not talk about the other stuff. But in his medal collecting role, the man collects Victoria Crosses. This is quite an achievement. I've been collecting medals for 40 years, and I have one. He's very annoyed about that, because I bought it and he didn't. But that was quite funny. He has, at the last count, 184. He doesn't actually know anything about the medals. If you say to him, "What's that?" he'll say it's a Victoria Cross. If you say to him, "What's that?" he says, "I don't know." And you say, "Well, it's a 14 star." I say, "Oh, is it?" He doesn't know. What he does is he buys the story. And it's the story that fascinates him. They are very, very expensive little bits of kit. They just are. And rightly so. Average price, about £100,000, going upwards. The last one that Lord Ashcroft bought was the one for Noel Chevez. You know Noel Chevez of Victoria Cross and Bar, and he bought that just before Christmas, and he paid £1.5 million for it. I'm quite a lucky boy because I did get to go off and hold that one. The Victoria Cross itself is an iconic medal, but it's very plain. When you do go over to our medal gallery, there are 14 Victoria Cross groups on display, but I'll tell you now, all of the Victoria Crosses are copies. Every museum, pretty much, in the country puts out a copy, because you can't put out the real thing. They are very small, and they don't actually look like much. This is a real one. This one has its name on the back of the suspender, and it has the date on which he won it. Now, I have something of an affinity with the First World War, as I know you do. So I went to the bank yesterday and I chose this one for you to have a look at, because the date on the back of this one is the 1st of July 1916. This one belongs to a man called Rees. Rees was in the Royal Garrison Artillery, and he had gone out to France in 1914 and been wounded. He came home, and while he was at home, he volunteered for the Royal Flying Corps, and he became a fighter pilot. On the 1st of July, he took off, and as far as I can work out, he's flying somewhere over Beaumont Hamel. And he's with his wingman, who he lost sight of and was never seen again. He did actually crash and was killed that day, but nobody actually knows what happened to him. Rees continued and saw above him a flight of British bombers coming back from the Germans towards the British lines. And Rees thought, "I'll escort them home." And he flew up and he joined this formation, and it was at that moment he found out that they were Germans. He shot down 2 of them, and they shot at him. They shot at him, and they severed his thigh bone and cut the femoral artery. He lost control of his aircraft, and it dived. He regained control. He grabbed hold of what was left of his leg, and he joined it to the stump. And he used that to push the rudder pedal. And he went back up and got back into the fight. He shot down 1 more. Then he ran out of ammunition. Then he turned for home. And he landed the aircraft. 1 VC. VC, OBE, MC, DFC. 4 mentioned in dispatches. World War I, 14 star and bar trio. World War II, 39-45, Africa, defence, war. Coronation Medal, Queen Elizabeth Coronation Medal. Not bad, is it? Someone who was 5'2". This is a group captain. Group captain. He was a captain when he did it. It's a good one. Okay? It's £250,000. I'm going to hand it round. It has to come back. I have been told that they know who you are. Okay? Please have a look at it. The only thing that I have to say to you is that if you are going to think about taking a photograph of it, please do not photograph the back. Okay? Front, fine. But my trustees will not allow the back of the Victoria Crosses to be photographed. This is because when you see it, it's an amazing piece of Please don't drop it as well, okay? It's an amazing piece of hand engraving. It is tiny. But when you take a Victoria Cross to Hancock's and you say, is this real? They get out a black book about this size and they go, yes, it's real. And the reason they know is because they are engraved completely differently every time. It might say private, big P, big T, big E. It might say big P, little t, little e, dot. And it's the combination of how they make that line up as to whether or not they can recognise their actual engraving. So we try not to let people take a photograph of the back because you can go home and make one. However, when you actually do get hold of it, you'll notice that if you've ever held a copy Victoria Cross, they are completely different from the one you're about to hold. When they make them in batches of 12, a bit like an Airfix model. That's an Airfix model and a half, that one, isn't it? With a little sprue, 6 on either side, and 6 bars, and that's how they make them. They sand cast them, and when they come out, they're actually the colour of brass. They're very shiny. What they do with them is they dip them in acid, and it's the acid that makes them go black. They then polish them. If you look at Lance Corporal Bahari's, it's pitch black, absolutely pitch black. If you look at this one as it comes round, you'll see that Group Captain Rees, where it's rubbed against his jacket and the other medals, and where he's polished it ever so slightly, you've already seen it. There's highlights, isn't there? The brassy colour is showing through. When I put the 23 Victoria Crosses for the museum out on a table, I can actually pick out which one is whose. We have one to a man called Daniel Cambridge. Daniel protected his gun in the Crimea. He ended up only with the rammer. They bayoneted him 19 times, and he still fought them off. And eventually they shot him in the face. He still fought them off. He won a Victoria Cross. When he left the army, he became a warder at the Tower of London. And he wore his Victoria Cross every day. And it's like a mirror. There's no lion on the front, it's flat. He polished it flat. It's a wonderful Victoria Cross, one of my favourites. You've now, well, you lot have now seen one, okay? It's nothing, is it? It's just a little tiny piece of metal. When Queen Victoria said, it's the story, I think she got it right. I think she got it right. I've been privileged enough to meet a few Victoria Cross winners, and I know he wasn't in the First World War, but I met a guy who came out of the Royal Air Force Church in the Strand. And throughout the entire service, he had had his raincoat over his shoulder. And it was only at the very, very end, when he put the raincoat on, he was wearing a Victoria Cross. And you wanted to say, what? Why? But you knew why. Because he didn't really want people to know that he had one. And I think the Victoria Cross is known by all of us. It's known by the country. I take 8-year-old children in classes and I say to them, have you heard of the Victoria Cross? And they have. They actually know what you're talking about. But I think what sometimes we don't realise is that the burden that comes with becoming a Victoria Cross winner is enormous. I've spoken to Lance Corporal Bahari. He's an ordinary lad. He didn't know that the day after that someone gave him a Victoria Cross, he would go from being Johnson to someone as famous as David Beckham. Like that, instantly. And with that comes a huge burden. The Victoria Cross is unbelievable. And when you do read those stories from the First World War of those guys who did those amazing things, one can only be awed. But because we know so much about the First World War, one can only also think about the guys who did things that never got seen, who also probably deserved one of those. I'm just about finished, I think, on my Victoria Cross talk. I hope you've enjoyed my ramble as we wandered along. It's going to go round, and we've now got the time that it takes for it to go round. I can see where it is. No, sir. Trust me, I can see you. All those guns outside are loaded and pointing at us. In the time that it takes to go round, are there any questions? Sir? How much does it cost to make them? I was talking to Hancock's I won't say the other day, but just before Christmas, and with the box, cardboard, the engraving, the ribbon, about 60 quid. It's pathetic, isn't it? About £60. We have also given retrospective Victoria Crosses. As you know, I don't know if you do, I should have said, but the Victoria Cross, when it was first instituted, is not a posthumous award. It actually says in the statute, you still have to be alive at the end of this to claim your medal. And the two people who caused the concern over this were Lieutenant Coghill and Lieutenant Melville, 24th Foot, at the Battle of Isandlwana, who tried desperately to save the colours. And this is a very Victorian thing to do. I mean, saving the colours is, you know, deeds that thrilled the empire stuff. They didn't do it. They both got killed. But public opinion said they should have a Victoria Cross, and Queen Victoria said no. You can't, because the statute says you have to still be... Well, they said, well, change the statute. And she said, no, I won't. It's my statute. That's how it's going to stay. Edward VII was a medal collector. And the moment he came onto the throne, he said, would you posthumously make this an award for the... And he said yes. And he backdated it to 1879, and he did about 4 more in between, which is quite handy because the First World War, 642 Victoria Crosses, 248 posthumous ones.
I'm just going out there.
No, come back, sit down. Yes, madam.
Has it ever been presented to a woman?
No. No, a lady has never been officially awarded a Victoria Cross. However, there was a lady at the Residency in Lucknow during the Indian Mutiny, and she was on the firing line in the Residency, and she reloaded for people when she was wounded. She instead of firing, she actually reloaded, and she was put in for a Victoria Cross, and it was turned down. And the officers of the regiment that she fought with went to Hancock's, had a Victoria Cross made and engraved, and presented it to her privately. So there is one out there with a lady's name on it, and it's a real one, but it's never been gazetted. Yes,
So do
there's
they
one.
know where it is now?
I don't think anybody knows where it's got to. No.
So is there a reason that it's not presented to women?
Yeah, lady. No, it's only men. There you go, just men. Ladies weren't awarded campaign medals either. There was a woman in Nelson's Navy. Men, the ship's crew, were entitled to take with them, in their words, wives and sweethearts. And the men would go on board ship, and they would form a mess, 10 men, and every man within that mess was entitled then to put the name or make a mark of said wife or sweetheart who was waiting on the quayside into a hat. Name was chosen, that lady was taken on board. The rest of the ladies, no more to do with them, the Royal Navy had to walk home. Lady taken on board, not paid. Clothed from what was called the slop's chest, that was the chest of the clothes of dead men, was fed. Job on board ship, cooking, cleaning, washing, ironing for the 10 men in the mess. Anything else that 10 men in the mess could think of, being honest there. On the 1st of June 1794, there was a battle in the Atlantic, a French fleet action, French and English, French coming back from the West Indies, English coming across from the European side. Action lasted about 9 hours. We sank quite a few French ships, which was actually quite bad because they were full of gold. We captured a few, which was great because they were full of gold and we got to keep the ship. But there was one ship there called HMS Tremendous, and on board HMS Tremendous was a lady called Mrs. Mackenzie. The women's action station was on the orlop deck, which is the one just above the bilges, and it's where they kept the magazine where the gunpowder was. And when you went onto the orlop deck, you had to take your shoes off, put on felt slippers. The magazine itself was a wooden structure covered in felt, which was constantly made wet by seawater from the outside, so there could be no spark. All of the tools were made of brass. There was only 2 candles allowed on the orlop deck, and they were set inside boxes of glass, the panes of which were 1 foot thick. So it was a gloomy place. The ladies formed a chain from the magazine to the bottom of the steps, and they handed along the powder charges for the guns, and they were picked up by the powder monkeys who ran them up to the decks. They're the 8-year-old boys. Mrs. Mackenzie, we are told, she fought the first 2 hours of the action. and then decided that this was the most opportune moment to have a baby. She sat herself down on the orlop deck and she produced a son, who she named James Tremendous Mackenzie. Wrapped him up, put him over her shoulder, fought the remaining 7 hours of the action. Tough girl, tough girl. The medal that she would have been entitled to is the Naval General Service Medal, 1793 to 1840, which came out in 1847, and you still had to be alive to claim your medal. James Tremendous claimed his medal, and is the youngest man ever to be awarded a campaign medal. And when you look at the ship's muster book, you suddenly find his name. He's genuinely there, James Tremendous Mackenzie, and you go over the other side and it says rank, and it says gunner's mate, carpenter, sailmaker, gunner, baby. If Mrs. Mackenzie had still been alive in 1847 to claim her medal, she would have been turned down, because ladies don't get medals. There was one lady who fought at Trafalgar and did claim her medal. They didn't give it to her. And the first medals that they gave to ladies was 1880 for the Egypt campaign. But then they weren't entitled to clasps. So you could do all of these actions and the men would get 4 or 5 baht and the ladies got nothing. And it wasn't until the Boer War that clasps were actually issued to the ladies. So the statute today says anyone who is in a fighting capacity in the face of the enemy can be awarded. So there is actually somewhere out there a lady one day who's going to get one of these. So, yeah, there you go.
How do you feel this institution of the Australian, New Zealand and Canadian VCs?
No, I take the point. The Canadian one, they have just cut a little slither from the block that we had here at the museum and sent it to Canada. And what they've done with that is they've actually mixed it with Canadian bronze. So they've carried on the theme from our guns, so there's that vestige, but it's Canadian. I actually think that's quite a nice idea. The Canadians are also the only people who have changed the wording. Ours say for valour, the New Zealanders for valour, Australia for valour, but the Canadian one doesn't. It says in Latin pro valore for valour, but in Latin, because they couldn't work out whether they wanted it in French or English. So they plumped for Latin. Good move. Do you know, I 2 years ago, I did a Victoria Cross display for Her Majesty the Queen. And I had a Victoria Cross from our collection from Queen Victoria, George V, George VI. So, there is that classic moment in my life when I met the Queen, and it got to the moment when we were both standing there staring at each other, and I was supposed to say something, and I said, "Madam, Ma'am, would you like to see the fur hat that belonged to your grandfather?" What a stupid line to say to the Queen, but it got it going anyway. But it got to a point where she has a very tight timetable. You know, you have like 4 minutes, 14 seconds, and people count like this, so you can't ramble. Me, ramble. No, I can ramble for weeks. Anyway, the Master Gunner of England came up and said, "Your Majesty, this is Mark's favourite subject. He will just keep on talking, but we have to go." And she said, "So tell me, the Canadian Victoria Cross." And she asked exactly the same question. And it was great to get it from her perspective, because she thought it was also a fantastic idea, that they'd taken the idea but made it their own. So I think that was
I take it that the Australians and New Zealanders haven't quite done the same thing.
Not yet, but we believe that they probably will. They'll use their own block of base metal mixed with the strand from the guns.
And the latest Australian VC, is that one of theirs or one of ours?
It's one of ours.
That's theirs. That's one of ours.
One of ours, yeah. The ones that are coming out at the moment, Hancock's in 1972, Hancock's made 12. They gave one to a man from the Second World War who'd lost his. So that's one. Then they did Sergeant Mackay and Colonel Jones. And then they have done the 4 for Afghanistan. So they have 5 left. Yeah. The block, they think, will make another 80. So that'll certainly see me out of this job. Definitely, because the rate we give them at the moment is about another 300 years. Hello, sir. Yeah.
Why Christmas Day? Yeah. Who owns the bread farm that nobody talks about?
My nan, because he was so boring. When I was in the trench, oh, it's like Uncle Albert, isn't it? When I was in the war. It's like that. I believe so. I think it was my nan. I think it was my nan. And obviously that one question of how many people did you kill in the war, Grandad, was or Dad for my dad was obviously the one you weren't supposed to ask. It was asked one day, and it was probably over 500 because he was a Lewis gunner, so he did the job for real. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Just 2 points. Now, how did you obtain that medal, or how did the museum obtain it?
Yep.
And secondly, verification of the action. How was that carried out for air duels, so to speak?
It's a good question, isn't it? The medal itself belongs to the college that Rees attended, Eastbourne College, and they have had it in a safe for many years, along with these other medals, and it came to a point where they could not afford to insure it anymore. So they've actually put it on a 40-year loan to the museum because we can insure it for them, and that's how we get it. And I get to show it to people, and that's part of what this is about, really. People should be able to see these things. It actually, he won a military cross as well, and when the person who went to pick it up came back, they went, "I've got your medal," and he gave me this, and I went, "What do you mean you've got the medal? This is a military cross box." I said, "What do you mean you got the medal?" He said, "What's in there?" This is the wrong box. I opened it, it's got a Victoria Cross in, but that's how Rees kept it. He kept it in the wrong box. I probably lost the other one, I don't know, but he had so many medals, he probably couldn't remember which box went with which. It's a very interesting question about how do single-seat people in aircraft win Victoria Crosses, because it says in the statute, A, in the face of the enemy, and B, has to be witnessed by a senior officer. I can only assume that when Rees came back and he made his combat report, that was taken by a senior officer, and they said, wow. The other one, which one could talk about, is a man called Nicholson, who is the only man to win the Victoria Cross as a fighter pilot in the Battle of Britain. And Nicholson was on his first operational sortie. And he and his wingman were attacked by Messerschmitt 110s. And Nicholson shot one down. In the process of shooting it down, he was shot at. He was blinded in the left eye. He had a cannon shell hit him in the back of the left foot and basically blow his foot off. And the cockpit was set on fire. So much so that the instrument panel melted. The aircraft that had shot him down flew past him, and he saw it. He pushed the hatch back, and he opened the door, and then thought, no, I'm going to have him. And he says in his own words that he put his hand back onto the throttle quadrant and pushed it open and held it in the flames and watched the skin fall off of his hand as he did it. He chased this thing and he shot it down. He had 70% burns. He had his left foot missing and he was blind in one eye, and he bailed out. And on the way down, he saw what turned out to be a butcher's boy on a bike. And he shouted, "Oi, help," as he was coming down. And he was fired at by a man from the Home Guard with a shotgun. And he hit him with both barrels. I've seen his Mae West. It's peppered, absolutely peppered. Nicholson lands. Ambulance arrives from the local cottage hospital, somewhere down in Kent. So it's actually near a village called Smeeth. He came down in Kent. And a little cottage hospital arrives, ambulance, and it only had room for one man. And they took the Home Guard man because the butcher's boy broke the shotgun over his head. And he was worse hurt than Nicholson. Nicholson they took to the pub and they gave him half a pint of bitter. Bless. He survived. He survived. He had no fingers, he was blind, he lost his foot, and he was a bit of a mess. But from his combat report, they gave him the Victoria Cross. It sold in 1980 for £125,000. Quite nice. Quite nice. Nicholson, the only one. Yes, sir.
Lieutenant John Chard,
Yes.
Drift,
Yes.
apocryphal stories about him losing his VC or giving it to a French mistress.
Yep.
Do you have any knowledge of this?
It belongs now to Lord Ashcroft. It is his Victoria Cross and his South Africa medal. And this is the group of medals which came up for sale in 1972 73, and they were bought by Stanley Baker, who played Chard. And at the time, they were said to be a very good copy, replica, whatever. When they came back onto the market, they didn't come onto the open market, they came onto a private market, and they were offered to Lord Ashcroft. They were taken to Hancock's, and Hancock's did a test on them, and they said it's the real one. So the one that you see in the Lord Ashcroft collection, which opens this year on the 11th of November, will be Chard's actual one. I've held Chard's, I've held Bromhead's, and I've held Reynolds. The one that Lord Ashcroft has got that I like best is the one to Jones 761. And Jones 761 saved Sergeant Maxwell. Well, he tried to, but Sergeant Maxwell was killed. And it was the one where they cut the hole through the wall. And Lord Ashcroft has got Jones 761 VC and South Africa medal, and Sergeant Maxwell South Africa medal as well. And he keeps them all in one box, which actually is a pretty cool group of medals. Madam.
Do you know where Izzy Smith's VC is?
Izzy Smith. Where did this one get one? Not one that I've come across.
I don't know where he won it, but I know that after the war he was in hard times because he was a bit old bottom. And he sold it
Aren't we all?
for 10 quid.
Yeah, oh,
On the understanding
give him a profit.
if he ever came had 10 quid that he didn't want anymore, he could go to get
Get it
it back.
back, yeah.
And I just wondered where it may have
No,
gone.
there is a website that you can look up which is called Victoria Cross Locator, and it tells you where they all are. If they're in private hands, the one that I own, it just says in private hands, so it doesn't tell you who's got it. But if it's in a museum, it will tell you which museum that it belongs to.
I don't know that Lord Ashcroft may or may not have Izzy Smith.
It's not one that I've seen. He's written a book about them, and it gives you a big list of all the ones that he owns. So it's not one that I remember. No. Okay. Yes, sir.
I once read, since you read some of the survivors.
Yep.
I once read that there was a gathering or a misgathering of both guys who people who won the George Cross and the Victoria Cross, and the overwhelming thing that none of them believed they deserved to be awarded or couldn't understand why they did it.
No.
Is that your experience?
They always say that. The guy who's 19 years old, he's just won the Military Cross out in Afghanistan. Apparently, I haven't seen it, but I was talking to a friend of mine actually on the way here this morning. When I got to the museum, and she said, "Oh, he sounded lovely, you know." And he said, "I didn't do this. It was all of us. We were all doing our job." And that is a very common theme. I spoke to a guy who was he attacked on the 1st of July, just to the right of Sayre, and he was a sergeant. This was a long time ago. I was very privileged to meet these people. And he said, I walked along, and he said, I looked right, and I made certain the line was straight. And I looked left, I made certain my line was straight. I looked back, and they'd gone. And I looked back, and they'd gone, and I was on my own. And he said, every day, why am I still here? Why did it miss me?
Ashcroft VCs be on display.
At the Imperial War Museum, in a new gallery, a brand new gallery, which is going to be called For Valour. And it's not only his collection, it's also the Imperial War Museum's collection, and it's also George Crosses, Albert medals, and Victoria Crosses. I've seen the drawing. It's going to be stunning. Definitely going to be stunning.
The 11th of November.
11th of November, Remembrance Day, it will be opened. Yeah, that's the plan. Yes. Anybody else?
At the risk of being silly,
Yes.
did they manage to put his leg back again?
Reese.
Yeah.
Yes, they did. Yeah, they actually did mend it. But we have a photograph of him, and I know this is good. Without the risk of being silly, he's over on one side. Yeah, and again, he's about that big. He's a tiny little person. Really is very small. My Victoria Cross has come back. Is this the plastic one? There you go. My plastic Victoria Cross. Ladies and gentlemen, that's an hour. One more question.
Can it be recalled for misdemeanors? Can it be taken away from the receiver?
Yes. If you were court-martialed, if you were cashiered as an officer, then you forfeited your Victoria Cross, and about 8 were forfeited. However, Edward VII said, our medal collecting friend, said, if a man has won the Victoria Cross, he is entitled to wear it on the gallows. So the art of taking them back stopped in about 1902. But before that, yeah, about 8. Yep.
I thought that was George V.
That was Edward VII. Edward VII. Edward VII. Thanks, gents.
Thank you, Mark.
Oh, yeah.